On the night before he was betrayed, Jesus gathered with his disciples in an upper room in Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. He knew that his sacrifice was near and, with deep love, instituted the Holy Communion, sharing bread and wine with his disciples. Jesus, holding the bread, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." He then offered the cup of wine. Jesus, "This cup is a new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you." While they were eating, Jesus revealed that one of his disciples would betray him. The disciples were distressed when they heard Jesus say that one of them would betray him. They began to ask who it could be, unable to believe it was possible. Peter, whispering, "Lord, who is the betrayer?" Jesus, looking at Judas Iscariot, said calmly, "Jesus, the one to whom I give this piece of bread after I dip it is the betrayer." Jesus handed the bread to Judas, who immediately left to carry out the act of betrayal. The night deepened, and darkness fell over the city of Jerusalem. After the supper, Jesus took Peter, James, and John to the Garden of Gethsemane at the foot of the Mount of Olives. There, Jesus was overcome with anguish as he prayed. Jesus, kneeling in prayer, "Father, if it is possible, take this cup from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." As Jesus prayed, sweating drops of blood, his disciples fell asleep, unable to grasp the magnitude of the moment. In the stillness of the garden, an armed crowd appeared, led by Judas. He approached Jesus and kissed him, identifying him to the authorities. Judas, kissing Jesus on the cheek, "Greetings, Rabbi." Immediately, the guards arrested Jesus. Peter, in a sudden act of defense, cut off the ear of one of the guards, but Jesus stopped him. Jesus, "Put your sword away, Peter. All who draw the sword will die by the sword." Jesus then healed the guard's ear and surrendered himself willingly. Jesus was taken to the Sanhedrin, the Jewish religious council, where he was accused of blasphemy. False witnesses were brought forward, but their accusations were inconsistent. High priest angrily, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" Jesus, calmly, "I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the Almighty, coming with the clouds of heaven." The high priest, tearing his clothes, declared that Jesus deserved death. The guards began to mock and beat Jesus. While Jesus was being tried, Peter watched from a distance, trying to remain unnoticed. But when he was confronted 3 times about his relationship with Jesus, Peter denied knowing him. Peter, nervous, trembling, "I do not know this man." Immediately, a rooster crowed, and Peter remembered Jesus' words. Heartbroken, he went outside and wept bitterly. The next morning, Jesus was taken to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. The Jewish leaders wanted Pilate to sentence him to death. Pilate, perplexed, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus, "You say that I am." Pilate found no guilt in Jesus and tried to release him, but the crowd, incited by the religious leaders, demanded his crucifixion. Crowd shouting, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate, seeing that he could do nothing, washed his hands as a sign of innocence and handed Jesus over to be crucified. Before being crucified, Jesus was brutally scourged. Roman soldiers tied him to a post and whipped him with leather straps embedded with pieces of metal and bone. His body was left covered with deep wounds. After the scourging, the soldiers made a crown of thorns and placed it on Jesus' head, mocking him. Roman soldier laughing hail, "King of the Jews." They also placed a purple robe on his wounded shoulders and ridiculed him. Jesus was forced to carry his cross through the streets of Jerusalem to Golgotha. The crowd followed, some mocking him, others weeping. Jesus, exhausted from the beatings, fell several times under the weight of the cross. The soldiers, seeing that he could not continue, forced a man named Simon of Cyrene to carry the cross for him. Roman soldier, commanding you, help him carry the cross. Reluctantly at first, Simon took up the cross and carried it to the site of the crucifixion. At Golgotha, also known as the place of the skull, Jesus was nailed to the cross. Nails were driven through his hands and feet, and he was raised between two criminals, one on his left and the other on his right. Above his head, a sign was placed that read, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. As he hung on the cross, Jesus looked at his executioners with compassion. Jesus, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. The soldiers divided his garments among themselves, while some continued to mock him. While Jesus suffered on the cross, one of the criminals began to mock him. Criminal, with scorn, if you are the Messiah, save yourself and us. But the other criminal, known as the penitent thief, rebuked him. Penitent thief, we are punished justly, but this man has done nothing wrong. Turning to Jesus, he pleaded, Penitent thief, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus, with compassion, today you will be with me in paradise. At noon, darkness covered the whole land until 3 p.m. The sun stopped shining, and the world seemed to pause, as if all creation was mourning with the Creator. In the Temple of Jerusalem, the veil that separated the Holy of Holies was torn in two from top to bottom, symbolizing the end of the separation between God and humanity. Roman centurion, looking at Jesus, surely this man was the Son of God. Near the moment of his death, Jesus, in great agony, cried out to the Father, Jesus, in pain, my God, why have you forsaken me? Shortly after, he spoke his final words. Jesus, it is finished. With a final breath, Jesus bowed his head and gave up his spirit. The sacrifice was complete. The earth shook violently in response to his death. Joseph of Arimathea, a follower of Jesus, requested his body from Pilate to give him a proper burial. Along with Nicodemus, another disciple, Joseph wrapped Jesus' body in linen and laid him in a new tomb carved out of rock. A large stone was rolled in front of the tomb, and Roman guards were stationed to watch over it, at the request of the religious leaders. The Sabbath was a day of mourning and silence. Jesus' disciples were in hiding, fearing the authorities. The world seemed still, and sorrow spread throughout Jerusalem. There was no sign of hope, only despair. The religious leaders, however, felt confident that the problem of Jesus had been solved. They believed his body was secure in the tomb, protected by the guards. On the first day of the week at dawn, Mary Magdalene and other women went to the tomb to anoint Jesus' body. When they arrived, they found the stone had been rolled away, and the tomb was empty. Mary Magdalene, frightened, "They have taken the Lord. Where is his body?" Suddenly, 2 angels appeared and spoke to them. "Angel, why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here. He is risen, just as he said." Mary Magdalene, still shaken by the encounter with the angels, stayed by the tomb weeping. Suddenly, she saw someone she thought was the gardener. Mary, crying, "If you have taken the body of my Lord, tell me where you have laid him." Then the man spoke. Jesus, smiling Mary. She immediately recognized his voice. Mary, with emotion, Rabboni, which means teacher. Later that day, 2 disciples were walking on the road to Emmaus, discussing the events of the crucifixion, when Jesus appeared and began to walk with them, but they did not recognize him. "Jesus, what are you discussing?" They explained everything that had happened. Then Jesus began to explain the scriptures and how they spoke about the Messiah. When they reached their destination and Jesus broke bread, their eyes were opened and they recognized him. That evening, the disciples were gathered in a locked house, afraid of the Jewish authorities. Suddenly, Jesus appeared among them. Jesus, peace be with you. They were amazed and terrified. But Jesus showed them his hands and feet, the marks of the nails. Jesus, as the Father has sent me, I am sending you. He breathed on them and said, Jesus, receive the Holy Spirit. Jesus met with his disciples one last time before ascending to heaven. He took them to a mountain and gave them the Great Commission. Jesus, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. Then he was taken up into heaven, and a cloud hid him from their sight.